A powerful CEO abandoned his autistic daughter in the wild to die, thinking no one would ever find out. But the horse that saw everything never forgot. What happens next will break your heart, and heal it too. The snow fell heavier that morning. It was the kind of snow that silenced the world, muffling screams, secrets, and sins. Up in the mountains of Colorado, far from the city skyline that bore his name, Victor Grayson, CEO of the multi-billion-dollar Grayson Industries, stood like a statue, cold, unfeeling, as he looked down at the girl trembling at his feet. Her name was Lyra. She was 9 years old, pale, delicate, with eyes that didn't always focus on reality the way other children's did. Diagnosed with selective mutism and high-spectrum autism, she didn't speak much. But her silence wasn't ignorance. It was insight that the world refused to understand. Victor never wanted a daughter like her. She was a blemish, a reminder of his wife, Miriam, who'd died during childbirth and whose love softened him in ways he never forgave. When she died, the last trace of compassion went with her. Victor raised Lyra like an obligation. But when a leaked photo of her meltdown at a public fundraiser threatened to harm his upcoming merger, he did something no one could fathom. He sent her away. Not to a school. Not to a clinic. But to the woods. "You'll survive," he muttered, shoving a satchel of raw meat and a dull pocket knife into her arms. "If you want to prove your worth, learn from the wild. If you die, it's nature's call." She didn't scream. She didn't beg. She only turned once to look at Asher, the sleek black stallion Victor had ridden up on. A horse with eyes more human than beast. He saw her. And he never forgot. Victor galloped off, leaving her behind, abandoned in the heart of wolf territory as the sky wept snow like a curse. Later that night, the wind howled like it grieved. Lyra curled beneath a fallen pine, shivering, clutching the meat like a child would a toy. A set of golden eyes blinked from the distance. Then another. And another. Wolves. She shut her eyes tight, whispering a name only she remembered, Mommy. Suddenly, a large she-wolf padded forward, sniffed her, and stopped. Not a growl. Not a snarl. Only curiosity. Lyra opened her hand and dropped the meat gently in front of her. The wolf approached, and ate. Then, to Lyra's shock, it circled her. Sniffed her hair. Licked her cheek. And lay beside her. That night, Lyra slept, not alone, but wrapped in the warmth of a mother nature never forgot. Meanwhile, in the stables below the Grayson estate, Asher stirred. Something deep in his bones told him something terrible had been done. He had seen the girl be exiled. He had felt her fear. Unlike humans, horses remember emotion, they carry it like flame in their chest. And now, he began to pace. To dig. To plan. Because this horse would not let the girl die forgotten. The days blurred into weeks. In the depths of the snowy wilds, Lyra survived, not by strength, but by grace. The wolves never turned her away. Perhaps they sensed something in her the world never did. She didn't speak their language, but she didn't need to. When the alpha growled, she understood it meant wait. When the pups yipped in circles, she knew it meant follow. When the wind carried strange scents, she watched the pack bristle and learned to do the same. They taught her how to drink from running streams without getting sick, how to move silently over fresh snow, how to share food without starting a fight. She had no calendar, no clock, but she could now tell what time it was by how the light struck the rocks. At night, she curled beneath the belly of the alpha she now called Ember. The wolf's heartbeat soothed her more than any lullaby ever had. Lyra changed. Her hair grew long and wild. Her eyes sharpened. Her silence no longer felt like fear, but something ancient, something wise. The girl who once needed therapists and special aids now moved like a whisper in the forest. And all the while, in the distance, Asher ran. The black stallion had escaped the Grayson estate 4 days after the exile. No one believed he would dare. But Asher had waited until the stable boy forgot to latch the gate. Then, With a thunderous snort and a fury Victor would one day come to dread, he sprinted into the wilderness, leaving broken fences and frightened workers behind. He ran by moonlight, tracing scents and memories. He didn't understand the full cruelty of what had happened, but he knew enough. Something had been taken from the earth and buried in silence, and his job was to unearth it. But Asher was not alone. Far across the city, in a quiet downtown apartment, journalist Naomi Vale stared at an email blinking on her screen. The subject line was simple: "You want to know the truth about Victor Grayson?" Naomi's hand trembled as she clicked it open. She had covered Grayson Industries for nearly a decade. Everyone knew Victor as a genius, a visionary. But Naomi knew the truth was uglier. Victor had been married to Miriam Vale, her cousin. And when Miriam died giving birth, Victor had vanished from the funeral. He hadn't allowed anyone from Miriam's side of the family near Lyra. Naomi had sent letters, emails, even tried to reach out through lawyers. Nothing. Now, out of nowhere, this. The email read, "Check the property cameras. The girl is gone. Ask about Project Lyra. If you're brave, come to Whisper Pines. And bring a warm coat." Attached was a still image. It showed Victor on horseback, snow falling, and a tiny figure in a red coat standing beside him in the mountains. The timestamp was from 6 weeks ago. Naomi's pulse roared. She grabbed her keys, packed her camera, her notes, and a USB drive she hadn't touched in years. On it were all the rumors she'd once been afraid to publish: illegal experiments, child psychology tests, confidential adoption files, and something she never dared say out loud. Victor didn't want Lyra because she reminded him of Miriam. But there might have been more than one child. Back in the wild, Lyra woke to the sound of rustling leaves. Ember stood alert, ears flicked forward, growling low in her throat. The rest of the pack had vanished. Lyra crouched, heart pounding, watching the brush. Something was coming. But it wasn't human. And it wasn't prey. It was Asher. His black coat shimmered like obsidian. His flanks were scratched, his eyes bloodshot from the journey, but when he saw her, he stopped. They stared at each other, girl and horse, silent as snowfall. Then Lyra did something she hadn't done in months. She walked forward. Slowly. Step by step. And reached out her hand. Asher lowered his head. She touched his muzzle, and the first tear slid down her cheek. She remembered. She remembered the sound of his breath when he'd turned to look at her in the mountains. She remembered the warmth in his eyes when her father had none. She buried her face in his neck and wept. He nuzzled her hair, then stamped the ground twice. Danger. Follow me. They had to move. Because someone else had entered the forest. And not for good. In a black SUV winding up the base of Whisper Pines, Duncan Slate, Victor's private security head, lit a cigarette and stared at the GPS. He had orders: find the girl, destroy the trail, and if necessary, silence any stragglers. Victor had grown paranoid. The wolves were symbolic, he said. They were meant to devour the past. But instead, they had adopted it. He wouldn't let that happen. Duncan was ex-military, methodical, and cruel. He believed in erasure more than redemption. And he had no intention of bringing Lyra back alive. That night, Naomi arrived at a rundown motel near Whisper Pines. The air was thinner here. The locals didn't speak much. But when she showed the desk clerk the still image from the email, the woman froze. "You shouldn't be here," she whispered. "But if you're serious, talk to the old stable hand up near the ridge. He's the only one who ever spoke kindly about the girl. Everyone else took their paycheck and shut their mouths." Naomi didn't sleep that night. Her dreams were filled with snow, teeth, and a child's laughter that echoed into silence. In the forest, Lyra followed Asher to the edge of a frozen creek. He stamped once. Then twice. Then looked to the left. A tree had been marked. Slashed with something sharp. Not a wolf mark. A warning. Suddenly, a howl tore through the air. Not embers. It was one of the young wolves. Lyra turned and ran. Asher galloped beside her. They reached the hill in time to see Ember surrounded by 3 men in dark uniforms. One held a rifle. Another had a trap. The third was Duncan, smiling cold. "They said you were just a rumor," he muttered. "Guess even rumors bleed." He raised the rifle. But before he could fire, something leapt from the trees. A blur of teeth and growl, one of the juvenile wolves. It sank its fangs into Duncan's arm, and chaos exploded. Ember lunged. The trap clanged. A shot fired into the air. Lyra screamed, but her voice didn't echo, it shook. Not just a scream. A word. No. It was the first time she had spoken aloud in months. The sound startled Duncan. He spun. Saw her. And smiled. "Well, I'll be damned." He raised the gun toward her, but a force hit him like thunder. "Asher." The stallion reared, hooves slicing air, and brought them down on Duncan's shoulder, sending him crashing into the snow. The other men fled. Duncan writhed, screaming, his arm bent wrong, his weapon buried in a snowbank. Ember limped forward. Lyra stepped between them, hand raised. "No more." She knelt beside Duncan. Reached into his pocket. Took his phone. She pressed call. The last dialed number glowed, Victor Grayson. She waited. The line clicked. "Did you take care of it?" His voice crackled. She held the phone to her mouth. Her voice was low, but steady. "Your daughter is alive. And she remembers everything." There was silence. Then a slow, venomous hiss. "Who is this?" Lyra didn't answer. She dropped the phone into the snow and walked away. Asher followed. Ember limped beside her. The forest had chosen its side. And somewhere in the city, Victor Grayson poured himself a drink, hands shaking. He would need to bury more than one truth. But this time, the past was no longer silent. The wind howled through the trees that morning, not like a predator, but like a warning. The snow had stopped, but the forest was restless, as if it knew the world beyond the pines had begun to take notice of what was hidden beneath its canopy. Lyra didn't sleep that night. She sat between Asher and Ember, her small fingers curled into the horse's mane, her back pressed against the wolf's warmth. Every once in a while, she'd look down at Duncan's phone, now off, the battery drained, but the memory of her father's voice still rang in her ears. He knew. He knew she was alive. She wasn't safe anymore. Naomi had spent the night piecing together timelines. The motel room was covered in papers, red strings connecting photographs and maps. On her laptop screen was a half-finished article titled "The Heiress of Silence, the Lost Daughter of Victor Grayson." She hesitated every time her fingers hovered over the publish button. The world didn't know what Victor had done. Not yet. But the world would soon know what Victor had tried to hide. That morning, Naomi met the stable hand. His name was Wallace Kemp, a man in his 70s with a bad hip and a sharper memory than most 20-year-olds. He had worked for the Graysons for over 2 decades, before being quietly dismissed after Miriam's death. "I told him," Wallace muttered, sipping coffee from a mug that read "Trust horses, not men." "Told him the girl wasn't broken. She just listened different. Felt different. Hell, horses liked her. That should have been proof enough she had a soul most of us don't." Naomi leaned forward. "Did you ever hear of something called Project Lyra?" Wallace's eyes narrowed. He stood, walked to a dusty cabinet, and pulled out a locked box. After a long hesitation, he opened it and laid down a series of photos in a single yellowed folder marked "Confidential, Grayson Medical." Naomi's heart froze as she flipped through the contents. It wasn't just about Lyra. It was about twins. Born 8 minutes apart. One quiet, one screaming. One neurologically atypical. One healthy. One named Lyra. The other, Luca. Victor had split them. Sent Luca to a private European institute under a false name, hidden in plain sight. The official records were redacted. Even Miriam's family never knew. He said the girl was unstable. Claimed one child had to be optimized for the Grayson legacy, Wallace whispered. But Miriam, she fought him. She died before she could tell the world. I think her death wasn't natural. Naomi sat in stunned silence. Victor hadn't just abandoned Lyra. He had manufactured a narrative. One child for compassion. One for control. And now, that truth was bleeding into daylight. Back in the forest, Lyra stood at the edge of a clearing as Ember rested beside her pups. Asher was grazing nearby, ever watchful. But Lyra's attention was drawn to the river, frozen, but faintly reflecting movement beneath the ice. Something stirred in her chest. A memory. A hand reaching for hers. A boy's laughter, faint and echoing, in a room filled with light. She didn't know the name. She didn't know the face. But she felt him. Later that afternoon, she and Asher followed the river upstream. They moved in silence, the horse navigating frozen trails like instinct. Then she saw it, a makeshift tower, partly ruined, hidden by frost-covered firs. On one of its rusted gates was an emblem, a white raven perched on a scale, Grayson Industries' oldest logo, long retired. Inside, the remnants of a lab. Lyra climbed the broken steps, brushing aside vines and snow. Shelves were toppled. Terminals destroyed. But one screen still blinked faintly. She touched it. Static flickered. Then an image loaded. 2 babies. In matching blankets. Holding hands. And behind them, her mother. Lyra reached out, fingers trembling. The screen went black. The scream that came from her was not loud. But it was sharp. Ancient. It cut through the woods like a knife. Asher reared back. Somewhere, far off, wolves began to howl. And at the same time, Victor Grayson stood in his penthouse, staring at a message on his private tablet. Naomi Vale has reopened the Project Lyra file. Subject L002 has been located. His knuckles turned white. He turned to his assistant. Where's Luca? The assistant swallowed hard. Sir, we've lost the signal. Victor's face darkened. Then it's time to burn it all down. Naomi was driving up the mountain now, with Wallace beside her and a printed copy of the Project Lyra files in her glove box. She had no plan, just the truth and a fire in her bones. The world needed to see what power did when unchecked. But they weren't alone. Behind them, another black SUV followed. Duncan was gone, hospitalized, arm shattered, but Victor had sent others. Men with no names. As the snow began to fall again, Lyra returned to the wolf den. She knelt beside Ember, who sniffed her face gently. Then Lyra took the red scarf from her neck and tied it to Asher's saddle. It was time to leave. The forest had protected her. Now she had to protect the truth. With Ember limping beside her and Asher carrying her slowly downhill, she headed toward the outer cliffs where signal towers loomed faintly in the clouds. Her fingers clutched the phone she had stolen. Its battery now charged by a makeshift solar pack Duncan had dropped. She opened the contacts list. Only one number made her heart freeze, Luca, active file. She pressed call. The voice that answered was soft. Cautious. Hello? She didn't speak. Is someone there? Her lips parted. A breath escaped. Do you remember the stone room with the blue walls? There was a pause. Then a quiet, stunned voice. Lyra? The name cracked like thunder. She gasped. He gasped. He was real. Somewhere in Zurich, a 17-year-old boy stared at the phone, eyes wide, heart pounding. He didn't know how she had found him, but he knew this, she was alive. And he needed to get to her. Behind her, the forest roared. Gunshots. Naomi's car had been run off the road. Smoke spilled from the engine. Wallace had dragged her into the trees just as the men approached. But they were closing in fast. One had spotted Asher's tracks. They were coming for the girl. Asher galloped. Lyra clung tight. Ember darted through the underbrush, slower but relentless. They reached a clearing with a burned-out ranger station. There, Naomi stumbled from the woods, blood on her temple. "Lyra," she cried. They ran to each other, strangers, but bound by Miriam's blood. Behind them, tires screeched. Men in black emerged. Armed. Grim-faced. But before they could fire, the trees exploded in movement. The wolves descended. Not just Ember. The entire pack. They came like shadows, leaping, snarling, overwhelming. Naomi grabbed Lyra's hand. Asher whinnied. Together, they bolted. Naomi pulled out her phone and hit send. The article went live. The world would know. Victor Grayson stared at his screen as the headline flashed across every news network. Grayson CEO accused of medical child trafficking and infant separation cover-up, exclusive investigation. His hand trembled. He poured another drink. But this time, it shattered on the floor before he could lift it. In Zurich, Luca packed a bag and booked a flight. He had spent his life behind glass. Now, he was coming to meet the sister he'd been told was never real. And deep in the woods of Whisper Pines, the girl raised by wolves watched the sky lighten. But she knew it wasn't over yet. Not until the man who destroyed her mother faced the child he tried to erase. The city watched as the empire cracked. Within 48 hours of Naomi's exposé, Victor Grayson's name went from revered to reviled. Major networks ran back-to-back coverage, images of Lyra as a baby, leaked documents from Project Lyra, audio logs from the stables, and satellite footage showing private vehicles entering the forest during the blizzard weeks prior. Protesters gathered outside Grayson HQ, shareholders panicked. Emergency board meetings were held behind closed doors. But Victor? He didn't run. He stayed in his penthouse, curtains drawn, a glass of untouched scotch melting on his desk, waiting. For what, he didn't know. Maybe he thought he could control the damage. Maybe he believed that money and silence still held sway. Until the elevator dinged. He turned. Naomi stood there. And beside her was Luca. The boy was taller now, sharp-featured like his father but with eyes that burned like Miriam's. His voice was quiet when he spoke, but it cut deeper than any headline. "I was told my sister didn't make it," Luca said. Victor's fingers twitched. "I gave you everything," he said, voice brittle. "Education, safety, power. You gave me a lie." Luca stepped forward, phone in hand, camera recording. "And now the world will hear yours." Victor lunged, but Naomi had expected that. 2 federal agents entered behind them and pinned him to the floor. His wrists were cuffed, the camera still rolling. "You won't get away with this," Victor hissed. She was a failure. She couldn't even speak. "She speaks now," Naomi said. "And the world is listening." Back in Whisper Pines, Lyra waited. She stood on a cliff that overlooked the endless green canopy of the forest, the only home that had ever accepted her without condition. Ember sat beside her, her side rising slowly with breath. She was older now, slower. Her right hind leg, still scarred from the night of the attack, trembled gently as she sat. Asher stood a little farther back, head bowed, watching the girl he had followed from abandonment to defiance. Lyra closed her eyes. The wind blew her hair across her face as if brushing away the last traces of who she used to be. For the first time, she didn't feel like a burden or a mistake. She felt like fire. She felt like truth. Behind her, footsteps. She turned. And saw him. Luca. They didn't speak at first. They didn't need to. She walked forward. So did he. And when they met in the middle of the clearing, he reached out and touched the red scarf still tied around her neck, the one she'd once tied to Asher's saddle. She smiled. Just slightly. "I remember you," he said. A tear slipped down her cheek. I remember us. They sat there together for hours, twins torn apart by ambition, now stitched back together by something stronger. Naomi watched from a distance, her fingers resting lightly on her notebook, unsure whether to write or simply let the silence speak. The trial began 2 months later. Victor Grayson pled not guilty to all charges. The world laughed. Naomi released the second wave of files, documents that Wallace had kept hidden even from her. Among them, recorded testimonies from former staff, bank transfers to shell companies funding secret optimization clinics, and a letter, unsigned, written by Miriam days before her death. If anything happens to me, it's not an accident. Victor has plans for our children. He believes legacy means control. But Lyra isn't broken, she's the only part of us that still listens. The courtroom gasped when the letter was read aloud. But the real moment came when Lyra took the stand. The judge offered her an out. She didn't have to testify. The trauma she endured was enough. But she insisted. Luca walked her to the stand. Naomi stood nearby, ready in case she froze. She didn't. Her voice trembled. But it rang clear. My father left me in the woods to die, she began. Because I didn't fit into his world. Because I wasn't what he wanted. She paused, then looked toward Victor, who sat expressionless behind his lawyers. But nature took me in. A wolf lay next to me like a mother. A horse galloped across the mountains to find me. I was loved. Not for what I could become, but for who I already was. The jury wept. Victor didn't blink. And now, she whispered, the world will know what kind of man builds an empire by erasing his children. Victor was found guilty on all counts: criminal neglect, obstruction of justice, fraudulent identity construction, and unlicensed medical experimentation. His sentence, life without parole. Grayson Industries collapsed within a year. But something else rose from its ashes. Naomi and Luca started the Lyra Foundation, a non-profit focused on supporting neurodivergent children abandoned by institutional systems. It provided therapy through animal bonding, wilderness rehabilitation, and safe havens for kids misunderstood by the world. Lyra didn't take a formal position. She simply visited the forest once a month. Sat beneath the same pine where she'd once huddled in the cold, now warm with memory. Ember, old but alive, would rest beside her. Asher, retired from any stable, remained her companion until the end of his days. One day, while brushing Asher's mane, a little girl approached her, wide-eyed, fidgeting, nonverbal. Her parents looked unsure in the distance, whispering about progress. Lyra reached out her hand. The girl didn't flinch. She stepped forward and gently placed her forehead against Lyra's shoulder. That night, Lyra wrote one line in her journal. I didn't survive to speak louder, I survived to make the world listen better. She didn't need her father's legacy. She had carved her own, out of frost and fur and silence turned into song. And through the howl of the wolves and the gallop of the horse that had never abandoned her, she carried the truth forward, one story, one child, one breath at a time. __________. If you ever feel like the world doesn't understand your voice, don't silence it. Find the place where you are heard. And if you can't find it, build it. For Lyra, that place was the wild. For someone else, it might be your words, your kindness, your courage. Be someone's Asher. Be someone's Ember. Be the one who doesn't walk away. Share this story. Support real stories like it. And let the silence speak no more.